I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We decided to delay this town hall because over the past few weeks, our country has had a moment of reverence and honor for Black lives lost to hundreds of years of racism. So while the topic of this town hall will be economic justice, we thought it inappropriate to talk about that in the moment where we were talking about in the moment where our people were focused on Black lives, honoring Black lives, and demanding justice for Black death. Um, So tonight we'll be talking about economic justice, which a huge indicator for criminalization is rates of poverty and also the blackness or brownness of one's hue of skin. So thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you to the panelists. We're so grateful that you were able to take time out of your schedules to join us. Naja Nava Harvey Quinn will be our co-host, my co-host. My name is Alia Harvey Quinn. I'm the founder and executive director for Force Detroit, and you have arrived at Free Our Wallets.
Yes. Hi, everyone. So we're going to start the conversation off where we left off yesterday. We want to ask our panelists their opinion, if they didn't get to speak yesterday, on defunding the police and like what your community vision for that would be. I want to start with Ray Winans. Welcome. If you could also tell us a little bit about yourself and the expertise that you lend to the space for anyone who may or may not know your work.
Hey, so good evening, loved ones. Ray Winans, one of the co-founders of D-Live and currently serve as the executive director. We're the state's first hospital-based violence intervention program. And so our whole mission is to address this community issue of violence from a public health lens and treat it as such. And so, yeah, glad to be here today. And so, when you start, do you want us to do the introductions? Wait on everybody to do the introductions, or do the intro and then answer the question?
We're going to start with the introductions, then we're going to ask the questions. Ms. Rashida Tlaib, if you could introduce yourself for us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. I've been representing 13th District, which is 12 Wayne County communities, including Detroit. I sit on House Oversight Committee, which is kind of a watchdog committee that oversees a lot of the decisions being made, including the aftermath of implementation of a lot of the COVID relief packages I hope we'll probably be talking about. And then I also sit on Financial Services Committee, which we do a lot of stuff around housing and auto insurance, and even recently of how do we help local governments and others during COVID. Yeah, and born and raised in Detroit, proud graduate of Southwestern High School, the eldest of 14 and a mother of 2.
Thank you. Chris Jackson.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. Chris Jackson, I hail from Pontiac, Michigan, born and raised, and I am partner in a, here we call them provisioning centers, but cannabis operations Sticky, which we have 2 locations currently, retail locations, 1 dispensary in Ypsilanti, another in Detroit. I'm also on the Leadership Council for the Small Business Association of Michigan. I am president of our Downtown Business Association here in Pontiac, and I'm also on the National Cannabis Industry Association board, the first Black male, and the NCIA is the largest and oldest association in the country for cannabis associations. So happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Ms. Clarinda Harrison, I'm sorry.
No worries. Good evening, everyone. My name is Clarinda Harrison. I represent my own private urban planning firm. It's called Planning TES, and TES is for the Everyday Sacred. The focus of our planning firm is really to help lift up Black people and brown people in urban centers, particularly as they are often bearing the brunt of systemic inequity and gentrification, and building into planning, economic development, and community development processes, inclusivity and equity. And I've been doing that work for 17 years now. Not born in Detroit, but raised in Detroit on the East Side. Currently still live on the East Side of Detroit, which is where I am right now. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, thank you. And we're gonna go back to, we're gonna go back to Ray on your opinions of defund the police, and what would your community vision be for that?
So when I think about the community vision and reallocating dollars, it's just to do that, right? We're talking about equity. And so I think a big part of it has to take place in the neighborhoods where we're leveraging home ownership, right? Be able to buy and purchase homes with some of that money and allow people to have a platform and get the assistance that they need over the course of 2 years without a payment, and putting them on a path to home ownership, right? And getting healthy financially, right? To me, that would be the equitable thing to do, put more money into health, right? So yeah, and trusting the community with the resources for their peers as well.
Yeah. Rashida, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, what's your opinions on defund the police, and what would your community vision of it be if you do support it?
Absolutely, and everybody knows I do, because that's all Fox has been talking about. But I want you all to know, I always like to center around this, because I just, there's always this move to discredit these kinds of movements, which, we're always having to explain our words, because our words are policed differently in communities of color, right? And so even when 2013 Black Lives Matter, that term, when it was really birthed, right? We always talked about Black Lives Matter and things like that around the state, but really when it was uplifted in a way nationally, you should know, Democrats alike, there was even an internal memo that leaked out where people are like, I don't know, I don't like that word. Like, doesn't all lives matter? Or what about police? Does that mean like police lives don't matter? And it was just so much of that kind of tension and discrediting. There was in the memo, and even, again, don't always think it's Republicans. It's just even people that we all love and respect, right? But we also know that there, sometimes there's a lack of urgency, I would say, to be nice. But there is this sense that, what is that really? That's so, they're using terminologies to kind of discredit it, similar to Black Lives Matter movement, which now, oh my God, because the polling says it's really popular, that all of a sudden now it's accepted. Well, I'm just being honest with you as representing the 3rd poorest congressional district. It is very clear to me when I talk to residents, even the ones who are like, what does that really mean? I tell them this. I said, do you remember there's always the one or two, or maybe it's one of us listening now, in school, maybe you have an anger outburst, something's going on. You're not met with a police officer and a gun, or a security guard with a gun. You had a counselor to go to, a social worker. There was always that one woman in the school, you know who she was, and you went to her and she talked to you, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. And it could be anything, right? And so that's not what's happening. We're criminalizing poverty. We're criminalizing lack of mental health. We're criminalizing the lack of access to quality healthcare, all of these things. And so I just want to reiterate to people, what this means is put us first, prioritize us, which, our kids shouldn't be right now in court begging. They're suing the state of Michigan, saying we have a right to read. We have a right to literacy. Just think about that for a moment. Black children are in court saying, teach us how to read. That should never be the case. And so when I think of, when I hear the word defund, which is not new, I just want to be honest, this is not new. I've heard it in the 90s, in the late 90s, not to age myself, but I was hearing about this. Why are we closing up mental health institutions, but opening up prisons? That's what happened in the 90s, y'all. So there's a lot of history there. And, even some of my older African-American neighbors, they call me, they're like, I love you, Rashida, but come on, don't say that. And I'm like, here we go again. And I just remind them of what they used to have, which was so much better. I know it's hard to believe, even they had counselors, they had social workers, they had nurses. And so we just want what white communities have or what other communities have. They're not out there begging for nice parks or begging for less, militarization of police and more around, what we can do to help youth. And I know that's a long answer, Najat, but I just, we have to start with that foundation for people to truly understand the gaslighting that is happening around this terminology.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And Chris, what's your opinion on defund the police? Do you support it? What would your community vision for that be?
Yeah, so I do support defunding the police, and really what it means is just reinvesting, right? Like, of course, and unfortunately, there shouldn't be any caveats with anything that we have to say, but of course, there are certain necessities that come with law enforcement, and I think we all know that, right? But at the same time, money should be reinvested, and really, I see two tracks to it, right? I think one track is either to what is typically lifeblood in communities, and that's small business. There is no lack of talent in any of our urban Black people of color communities. And it's really important there's already an issue with people of color having access to funds to begin with, right? And so if you're talking about self-determination, and again, it doesn't mean anti anyone else, but people of color taking care of themselves economically, especially, then it's really important that we support what would ultimately build up our economic platform, and that would be us owning businesses within the communities that we live in. The other track I would say quickly is obviously investing in the youth. I'll give a quick example. In Pontiac, there are 3 hospitals that exist, right? And so if we take all of those resources and put them in schools to put kids on track, right, to become medical professionals, provide scholarships through that funding to local colleges and universities so that when those kids graduate high school, they can go to college, practice medicine, and then do interns with the largest employer in our city, which are hospitals, then it makes more sense because now we're putting money and perpetuating a positive track generationally moving forward. And so I do support reinvestment, and I think there are a couple of tracks that we can go down and make it make sense.
Yeah. Alia and Clarinda, you guys both answered this question for me yesterday. If you have more input that you would like to put in today, I would like to open that space for you to do that.
My answer is yes. I support defunding the police through reinvestment in community, and a lot also of reinvestment in community safety initiatives that actually arise from the community and not from external militarized forces.
Yeah.
And I did answer yesterday, but I'll reiterate that I support defunding from the standpoint of reallocating those funds and reforming and dismantling systems that are the front door for mass incarceration, and moving that into resources and support for a community that prevent the criminalization of poverty, recognizing that there's a direct correlation between people who have significant need and have been starved out of their basic necessities like healthcare, quality housing, public programming, quality education. There's a correlation between that lacking and incarceration. And so recognizing that if we reallocate those funds to support those communities, that we won't have the same needs for policing that we believe we do right now.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're gonna move to our topic of today, which is living wage. So this question is for everybody. How many of the people that are in your community that you represent would you say are making a living wage? And how is the community being emotionally, financially affected by this current pandemic? How are we seeing those stressors show up? I wanna start with Ray Winans.
So the community that I represent, I would say about 70% of the individuals don't make a living wage, right? So they rely on their hustles or, rob Peter to pay Paul, you know, and it's very unfortunate, you know. So that's why I'm big on home ownership as one of the phase stages of building wealth, as well as financial literacy. Shout out to Clarinda, right? And so during this pandemic, you know, we've most definitely seen and experienced some of the greatest challenges, right? We all know and can talk about homelessness all day, every day, even couch surfing. But one of the things that we were able to recognize that we never foreseen was during this pandemic, a lot of folks didn't want folks in their home. And so their couch surfing had to come to a halt, right? And so we found a lot of young people that was just like became from couch surfing to being completely homeless with nowhere to go. And like really literally sleeping in vacant homes and trying to turn them vacant homes into the best thing they could, because some of their friends, grandmothers and great aunts couldn't afford for that coronavirus to hit their home. So they told their children, your friends can't be over here no more. So we've seen an uptick in homelessness with a lot of the young people that we serve in our network.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to segue right over to Clarinda. And people do believe in the groups that you represent are surviving on a living wage or minimum wage.
I'm gonna jump in and support her.
Exacerbated by
I think I might be getting some
pandemic
delays or having some technical issues. Can you all hear me okay?
We can hear
Yes,
you fine. I think
Okay.
she's experiencing technical issues.
Okay, I wanted to make sure it wasn't me, but I heard the question. So in my work, particularly around economic justice, I've spent a lot of time researching and understanding what the real circumstances are of people in communities of color, and particularly Black people. And we know that looking at data that was produced by the Michigan Association of United Ways, that 43% of people in the entire state are not making a living wage. And when you look at communities like Detroit, Pontiac, Highland Park, Hamtramck, we see upwards of 70+%. And living wage is not minimum wage. I saw that question come up. Living wage is fully loaded costs to live and thrive. And we know that takes for a family of four, a minimum of $65,000 per household. And so even $15 an hour, if it's a one earner household, is not enough. But two earners making $15 could be enough. But the reality is that is a bare bones budget. And even looking at a bare bones budget of basic necessities, we know that 75% of Detroiters are not meeting that need. And so as Ray pointed out, certainly we need to be thinking about economic development and opportunities for people in the city of Detroit and in communities like Pontiac and the others that I mentioned that are highly impacted, that the jobs are accessible, meaning that there's a skill set match in order for people to earn those wages, in addition to earn paid sick time off, in addition to healthcare benefits, because it's not just about the wage, it's about the quality of the wage plus the fringe benefits that a person receives in order to sustain their family and sustain their income, which has exponential impact across all other areas of healthcare, education, you name it, if we're able to help people access that. And workforce development programs and economic development is one way to do it, that leads to ultimately redistribution of wealth and home ownership.
I got fixed. Someone has, it's me or someone has real bad.
Okay. I will jump in and support her. Chris, can you touch on that subject? How many folks in your community are making a living wage, and how is this era impacting them?
Yeah, and I hope I say it right, Clarinda. I think hit on it, right? I don't think I could give a better answer than what she gave, and I'll just speak to our industry just a little bit, right? You have a new industry, an infant industry in cannabis that has a lot to work. It has a lot of work to do with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. 100%. But I will say, so far as starting wages and support go, by and large, I'm seeing on average, at least in the retail establishment, $17, $18 an hour, plus infringement, right? And it's because that amount of money is being pumped into from the economy into the cannabis industry, right? So it's inflated prices associated with it, and so we can typically give more money to the folks who work for us, and at least with our business and others who are local and not maybe maybe multi-state operators, but really the ones who are homegrown in different communities. We typically hire folks from the cities that we operate in. It's been a really important. I'm also the community benefits and social equity lead for our organization, and so it's really important that we do hire with keeping diversity, equity, and inclusion in mind, specifically in the city that we operate in. And so I am proud of the cannabis industry from that perspective, that like Clarinda mentioned, it's not just about the amount of money that they make, it's about the fringe benefits that they get on top of that. But there are also schools like out of Pontiac, higher learning institutions that's teaching bud tending, processing, cultivation, those types of things for individuals from cities like Pontiac and Detroit to be able to have an opportunity to either own businesses or work within the cannabis industry and actually have a skill set to do so. And so the support system, the workforce development that was mentioned by the other two folks is going to be really important as well. But yeah, I can't give much of a better answer than they already gave. So.
Yeah, and then we're going to pivot to Rashida, to Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. How many folks that you represent would you say are living on minimum wage or living wage, and how has this pandemic affected them?
So I think, I represent, so you say you represent third poorest congressional district, but some are, what I would call working class or whatever these labels, I hate them. But the point is they're in survivor mode. So I would say the majority of my residents are survivor mode, which is living check by check. I know 30% of my residents for sure work in the automotive industry, not just like GM or whatever, but it's a supply chain. I know I saw a statistic that like 1 of 4 Detroiters are essential workers, which indicates to me they might be working in the grocery store industry or other industries. But I introduced like the Boost Act, which would give people up to $6,000 per family, no matter as long as you were making less than $100,000, which is a majority of our neighbors. And they said it would pump up about 45% of people out of poverty in all of America. Like, think about that. Just switching. All I did was repeal the Trump tax plan that he had done back in when he first got elected, and just switch it to this program. And again, instantly, I mean, it's even better than earned income tax credit, which we love EITC. But in this instance, you wouldn't have it. You could be disabled. You don't have to, you could be a college student. You didn't have to be so-called what they would call working poor to qualify. Like EITC, you had to actually be working. But so many of my residents are caregivers, are disabled, my disabled residents, neighbors, and so forth. But absolutely, the majority of my folks are survivor mode. I think it's more than just living wage or even minimum wage. It is so much about, how do we think about like, what is the cost of living? Because when I see studies that show poverty solutions at University of Michigan, which, you did a whole wonderful one about auto insurance. Do you know auto insurance rates in Michigan keep people in the cycle of poverty? Just right. Those kinds of things. People think about rent and they think about cost of groceries, but also these kinds of dynamics that are in there where we're in a state that doesn't have mass transit, right? We don't have all of those things. So it really does pile on to a lot of our residents. But absolutely, we were in survivor mode before the pandemic, and now it's just worse. These moratoriums are great, but we all know after the moratoriums are over with, all those bills are still going to be due.
Yeah. I want to take a moment to acknowledge Eric Thomas. If you could introduce yourself, and I'm going to pass the questions off to you too.
Oh, Jesus.
Welcome.
Well, hello there. Forgive me. It's been a week. So I'm Eric Thomas, Chief Storyteller for the city, brand strategist, storyteller, Facebook, mess talker. I'm trying not to cuss. Me and Rashida both have to work on ourselves.
Listen, Denzel won't let me do it no more. He's like, oh, dare.
I got the same sickness. I'm working on me.
It's not sickness. Don't call it that. It's just be real.
Ray and I'll cuss for y'all, okay? We'll add the cuss words in.
You know what I'm saying? I'm just gonna bleep it myself. I listen to a lot of but yes, so I don't even know how to introduce myself. I don't even know what I do anymore. Storytelling, marketing, messaging, branding, and communication work at the city, though I'm not technically a PR person at the city. I'm not technically a comms person at the city. I am something else. So still defining what that means.
Yes. So for the people you are telling stories for, how many of them do you believe are living with minimum wage or living wage?
I mean, if you look at
and I think the rest of the question is, how is this COVID moment impacting them financially?
Yes.
I mean, if you look at Detroit, just by the numbers, right? The median household income for a family of four is what, $26,000 or something like that. It's shocking. And so what COVID has done is it's kind of just shaken the table on social inequity when you see how it dramatically impacts, because there's two things. I think you guys were touching on it as I joined. A, you have the people that are dramatically impacted by the fact that they can't go to work or they're getting laid off. And B, you have the people who have to go to work because they don't have the type of jobs where you can be remote. And so you have the split dead down the middle between, abject poverty and putting your life at risk. And there seems to be very little middle ground for those things. And it is, I joke that COVID made the government show its hand. Everything that people said they couldn't do, they did in a week. Oh, we can't help people. We can't provide universal basic income. Those people are crazy. Boom, everybody gets some bread. It's like, what? It's like, oh man, we can't turn these city services on for people. That's impossible. Boom, everybody gets some services. It's like, wait. So why are we fighting you? Well, except for reparation. We haven't made it to reparations yet because we are still Black. And it seems like Black people will be at the bottom of every single line. And Detroit is the blackest city, so it's going to be at the back of all of those lines. Okay. And it is frustrating. I mean, it's really the only way to put it. You could say it's traumatizing, and it kind of brings up all of this trauma that you experience when you know that when bad things happen, they happen to Black people. If they happen to Black people, they're happening to Detroit. I mean, that's kind of where we are. And so that is, when I think about what our job was, especially, I started my job 1 month before COVID hit. And so I went immediately into public awareness mode. We got to do this. You got to wear this. You got to distance. This is why we're distancing. It became almost a mad dash because the conspiracy pendulum swung, from Black people can't get COVID to Black people get COVID at the highest rate. And it swung in like a week and a half. And while we were scrambling to debunk that myth, it leapfrogged and it became people are giving us COVID because they're trying to kill Black people. It was like, guys, that's not happening either. But when you have an international airport, international businesses, and then you have abject poverty and the density that comes with urban areas, it creates almost the perfect storm, which is why you saw our numbers spike so rapidly. Plus our testing increased in international trade. Right? That's really important. International trade, we're a border to Canada. And then on top of all those things, our mayor, say what you want about Mayor Duggan, but he did run a hospital system. So our testing got up very fast. And we started testing more and more people than our surrounding areas. And so then those numbers spiked, not only because it was being proliferated, but because our testing numbers were increasing faster than the areas around us. It is It's a cluster, man. It's been interesting. But Detroit is made of resilient people. And even when you see people out in the world not doing quote unquote what they're supposed to do, you still see people out with their masks on. People in the hood with masks on. This is not like, Montana where they're just like, we're gonna get COVID to prove a point. Right? It's like people in Detroit do not want COVID-19 and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
You're right.
So that's great. There are people in the UP that are just like, we're gonna die to show the Democrats. It's like, all right, I'm not gonna stop you.
So, okay, we're gonna pivot questions again. Rashida, Congresswoman, who was left out of our first stimulus bill? And like, who's falling in these gaps on a national level, and how is that hitting Detroit and District 13 especially?
Yeah, so a lot of you might not know this, or maybe you do because you're on the ground. When it first was put out there, I knew right away, if there was a lot of my residents do not file federal tax return, not because they're required to, they actually don't qualify to. So they're working poor, so they don't have enough income to really pay federal they don't have to pay federal taxes. A lot of them get disability, a lot of them are retirees. And so when they said, hey, if you filed a federal return, then, and then there are some, let's be honest, not only because they're incarcerated or there were some other challenges, did not file a federal tax return in the past. There's all these dilemmas. So basing it on that really did leave a lot of people out. We fought really hard. One of my Democratic colleagues finally got them, like, if you get, so a lot of our seniors, they get their Social Security, it's like this little, you'll see it's automatic, and they get it from the federal government, but they don't have to file a federal return. So we said, isn't that enough for you to know they exist? They're making less than the amount of money to require to get it. So they were left out. We pushed on that, and we finally got them, but still, we still getting calls every single day of people still didn't get their checks. Yeah. Last time they did these checks, it took like 10 weeks for people to get out there. And they did what I did in the Boost Act, where they're doing debit cards, which I told them that debit cards are the best thing, because if we do another, hopefully it'll be reoccurring payments. That's what I want the whole time that the pandemic is going on, that it'll be rechargeable, just like we do for a bridge card, like I remember, a lot of my residents would just get it. And then if they had to reauthorize, it would automatically, you don't have to wait for something to come in the mail. And again, what also is left out, and you guys should know that my sister councils, survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, these are transient community, they don't have physical addresses. The other community obviously is our homeless neighbors. That's why in the ABC Act, I say we got to work with some of our shelters and homeless like agencies, give them the cards, let them distribute. So we left out a lot of people. And look, growing up in Southwest Detroit, I'm telling you right now, our broken immigration system has really left people out to dry. I mean, they're living under the shadows, y'all, like on purpose, because people make money off of them not being able to legalize themselves in this country. They don't go after the people hiring, they go after them and victimize them and separate them from their family. But most of my neighbors, including my DACA folks, some of those folks are all, my dreamer, they were all left out. And so there's still a lot of people, to me personally, I just feel like it's not cumbersome. If you are in the United States, you are not, exempt from being impacted by this pandemic. And I truly believe it needs to be all inclusive. But yeah, there's a lot of people being left out. And 1,200 is please don't, I hear a lot of people like, oh, 1,200. I'm like, that's nothing. They bailed out so much of the airlines who still laid off our neighbors, bailed out all these people, y'all. And so I think it should be 2,000 minimum per month. And then for the whole time the pandemic is happening. So none of this, like, gotta wait until another bill gets authorized. And then a year after, because you all realize, because again, the moratoriums are gonna be over with, a year after the pandemic, they get 1,000 a month, because the impact economically on people is still gonna be tremendous after this time. Because I think I saw somewhere like 50% of my residents might not have a job to go back to. So we need to realize that as well. But I know it's a long answer, but yeah, we get, just because I'm a congressional, we're getting the calls from people that still haven't gotten their, and some that, by the way, some will call and say, my wife, well, they only gave like $1,200 in my wife's name, but not me, but we filed taxes together. It's really broken.
Yeah.
Also, returning citizens who own businesses were left out. And, you know, with the high rate of criminalization of Black and brown people, that feels like a specific and intentional attack on people who have found financial footing after prison.
Yeah.
And I would just say, if I could add, the Paycheck Protection Program and the CARES Act also left out a lot of Black businesses and a lot of woman-owned businesses that are self-employed or in neighborhoods already struggling on the margins, employing other neighborhood residents and not receiving stimulus to help their businesses survive. So beyond the individual level, there's also a disparity in what's being offered to small businesses, particularly those owned by Black people in urban centers, and their economic well-being.
And like Clarinda, they tried to fix it in the second act. It wasn't quick enough. Not only that, there's still loans. So some of my home-based businesses in my district are calling like, Rashida, why can't it be a grant? Like, also it's a loan, y'all. Like, so just remember that too. Like, they're not even offering real relief. You know, and that's why, like, you know, I keep telling some of my folks, because you had to go through a bank and the bank had to go, you know, go through all this stuff. The people that got this money are the people that could afford a CPA, that had all this they already had resources and stuff that could get to the bank to actually acknowledge them. But me and Bank of America got in this huge fight because they literally were not like, you had to have a pre-existing relationship with, that was not required for the PPP, but even the PPP is just set up. It doesn't work. But I'll tell you, my small businesses in Detroit are wonderful because they met with me. I'm ready for them to talk about the PPP, which I was like, look, I'm not this big proponent of it. I actually have been really critical of it and saying, why are we doing loans, not grants? And why is it so hard? Why are you making it so difficult? It's all cumbersome. Like, why are you? And they were like, no, we don't want to talk to you about that. We want reoccurring payments. Because when you pay people, we got customers. When you do this is what happens. It stimulates the local economy. And I was like, okay, you know, so I just want y'all to know, like, their consciousness too is so much more thoughtful than like kind of how Congress is seeing how to approach these. And by the way, when they say small businesses, they're not talking about our businesses. No. They're talking about people with like 500 and like, I'm like, how is that a small business? But okay.
Yeah.
That was weird.
Clarinda, this next question is for you. In your previous role at the United Way, you oversaw the Returning Citizens Learning Circle, a study on the challenges and potential approaches to supporting the successful transition of returning citizens back into community. What were some of the insights into the needs of returning citizens, and how do you imagine that they've intensified in the era of COVID?
Yeah, so the thing we heard from the impacted community, justice impacted people, was that the reentry system didn't seem like it was situated to really support their success. So there would be contradicting, you know, regulations from their parole officer, while at the same time they're trying to find housing, while at the same time they're trying to be in a job program, and none of the things intersect. So you could be at a job program and potentially violate your parole. And so there was oftentimes a lot of disconnect and disarray in people just getting their footing. And oftentimes there's also just the trauma of having spent time being affected by mass incarceration. And then once you are released, there are cognitive and behavioral challenges that people face, if for nothing else, based on the trauma of that experience. And that's not being addressed, while they're also expected to re-enter into society, re-enter into employment, re-enter into all the things that they need to do in order to survive. So the disconnect of the system was most prominent, and that's also exacerbated by COVID because lots of places closed down. These are individuals who are often already disconnected from services, and so when you have the kind of disruption caused by the pandemic, that disconnect gap becomes even wider. So those individuals were impacted even more so than people who have been living in society prior to the pandemic.
Yeah.
So, can I chime in on what Clarinda said? Because what she said was just, powerful as hell and made me think. One of the other things when you was talking, Clarinda, about that the possible parole violations, right? This is the reality of it. So we look at the toxic stress of an individual who have to make a decision, right? So if I can't get a job and this violates my parole, I don't want to go back to prison. So shit, I'm not even going to report now, right? Like, so damn if I do, damn if I don't. And so it's a setup based off, I have to make a decision. I got my agent talking about locking me up. I got this person over here talking about they can't hire me, and I'm homeless. Yeah. But my homeboys in the streets hiring, I got to do what I got to do. Damn the agent and damn anything else. I tried.
Yeah, that leads to our next question. How are people hustling during COVID? Like, we know that people had to have 2 and 3 jobs to make a living. So I know that Eric has been vocal about like a lot of speaking engagements being canceled. So I would love both of your input on that. Like, how are people making up for the hustles that have been cut off because of the pandemic?
Yeah. So I guess I can hop in. What I have seen, Detroiters hustle, right? So we just kind of been doing what we can do, right? The same things that we would be doing. The only thing that really stopped or slowed down, it looks like, is all of the getting close to people. So the haircuts, the salons, all that kind of stuff. But that didn't all the way stop either. It's been some really crispy people out here in the quarantine. I'm just saying. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. But I think you see a lot of people kind of move into social, right? We're as many people who can move to social. We also have one of the greatest digital divides in the country because Detroit has the best and worst everything. That's just what we do. So that's our deal. So I've seen a lot of people shift to social and start learning things. I saw a lot of people jump over to stocks, really funny enough. And so that's become a real dangerous thing. See, everybody downloaded Robinhood. Yeah. And that was a thing, but now that's becoming dangerous because the market's so volatile. And then I think, honestly, people in Detroit just said, I'm gonna have to go outside and sell something before my family get hungry. I do think that $1,200 did create a little stopgap for a second. So people were able to kind of take a breather. But the hustle ain't never slept, right? So if you were selling hair, you were still selling hair, right? You were just mailing it and hopefully it didn't go through FedEx and Oak Park, or you were never gonna get that hair. But if you, people was
yes.
I know people, that is the worst thing that ever happened. But for my business slowed down quite a bit because I wasn't able to use some of the skills that I already built. I think Rashida mentioned that $1,200 ran out fast. That $1,200 real ran out fast. I think that was one of the goofiest amounts of money that I've ever seen anybody say an adult could live on for 3 months. $1,200 to where? To who? For what?
Yeah.
With babies? The babies didn't get extra bread. What's wrong with y'all? But anyways, what I saw was about 3 or 4 weeks of people just kind of shell-shocked for not really knowing which way to go. And then after that happened, people almost went back to their life on the business side. And I don't know if anybody else saw that just on the ground. All of the places that were too obvious to do business, you couldn't have a co-working space, you couldn't have a big store open or a hair salon or whatever. You couldn't do anything super obvious, but anybody that was hustling on the regular, who was just kind of selling and slanging and pushing stuff out the truck, moving t-shirts, all that kind of stuff, I didn't really see that stop for real. And I love Ray to hop in, I love Ray to hop in, but that is what I saw.
No, I think it was a mixture of all the things that you just described, right? And so, people, we talking about Detroit, right? But let's put, It's just being real, right? We're gonna be real with this shit. So you had people that's like, yo, okay, that's why unemployment had to get shut down. They like, these are reparations, right? We gonna break the bank, right? Like, yo, like we've been trying to do it the right way. Shit, we gone, right? I mean, like, and there you have it, right? And so, but one of the things, so it's like that gift and the curse, right? And Eric, and you named it. Like Detroit got the best of everything and the worst of everything, right? So just like I seen a lot of our young people in our neighborhood, they run around with thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars happy. But I'm like, so I was telling the team, I said, the thing that's scary about it on the flip side of it, if they don't do the proper investment, I would hate to see them on the other side of when the money is gone, what their depression can look like.
Yeah.
Or what that level of desperation look like. Because you had people who never had $5,000 to $10,000, and then next thing you know, they up $20,000. But what about when the money gone, being with do that land demand from a mental capacity lens? But yeah, I agree with Eric. Everybody just had to get how they live, and y'all see right now, everybody unemployment tied up, and they talking about, Michigan got hit probably the hardest.
Yeah.
So my next question is to Chris. We've seen the cannabis industry now become an essential business from something that was kind of like outlawed. So how has that affected the cannabis industry, and like what kind of pivots have you guys needed to make as well as small businesses?
So that's a Zoom town hall all into itself, right? So I'll start by saying that the industry proved to be recession-proof, right? One of the few industries that proved to be recession-proof. And we still weren't able to apply for any of the money federally that was being given out because it's still a Schedule I drug, federally, right? And so despite us providing medicine to patients, however you want to slice it, still medicine to patients in a lot of ways. So despite us being medical, providing medicine to patients, and deemed essential by almost every state in the union that has cannabis-oriented businesses, we weren't able to participate in trying to keep our businesses open. Now, the multi-state operators, the large ones, they were okay. But there were a lot of small dispensaries, even to this day, that don't know whether or not they're going to still be able to operate moving forward. Now, there's a caveat to that because only 5% to 6%, and that's being generous, of the businesses in the cannabis industry are owned by people of color. In Detroit, I think it's a lot worse, actually. And so municipalities, people who run legislation are becoming more sophisticated. They're becoming smarter about how they build legislation to ensure that people within the community have an opportunity not only to work at dispensaries, but actually own dispensaries, which is the important thing in the industry. But I will say that from an economy standpoint, for most localities, the cannabis industry actually kept it afloat for most municipalities. And so then there's that question, of course, of the traditional market, right? I don't like to say illicit. So the traditional market versus the new legal market and what's being done to kind of mend that gap. And at the end of the day, there are predatory things, especially in Detroit. There were predatory lending, financial things being done to basically get people of color to use as a front, right? So that people can get businesses, and then on pennies of the dollar, they were removing the Black folks, the local community people who have been there for a long time. And so the first thing that we need to do, now that the federal government, hopefully we'll get to a point, but now that state government especially sees that cannabis can fuel an economy, I think the next step is, what are we doing for funding for opportunities of people of color, for entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry? And then shortly after that, what programs are we putting together to make sure that they're mentored so that they actually succeed in the long run? And so, nice to be recession proof, nice to be deemed essential, but if we're saving economies as an industry, then you need to not treat us like criminals at the federal level.
Hey, Chris, I told my mom and my wife, we was looking at Fox 2, And I told him, I said, I never thought that I'd see the day that Hugh Perkins would come on Fox 2 News and say, here's the marijuana dispensaries that deliver. I'm
Right.
like,
Absolutely.
like, damn, okay.
Right. I mean, we had to act as restaurants, right? So we had to do curbside and we had to start doing deliveries. But in Michigan, especially, like it just continued to go up in numbers. And so it's odd to see, but like I said, like quit treating us as criminals federally if you're relying on us to take care of the economy.
Yeah, the bank. So the banking bill for cannabis bank, because I don't know if you all know, you probably got embarrassed my question to the in committee, but we passed it out of financial services. It passed out of the House, but it's in the Senate now. But yeah, a lot of people don't realize, you know, even though we've legalized marijuana in many of these states, it's a cash business now, which really, you know, makes it much unsafe for a lot of our business owners. It's funny because I don't know why, but I was like, doesn't it even make the money smells, dude? Like, you know, it does. And so I was like, you know, there was all these issues around, literally seriously, and it caused a lot of problems, but it also, you know, more and more employees, everybody has to be paid like cash, right? Because banks won't do, because the federal government doesn't actually legalize cannabis banking right now. And so a lot of people don't realize that, but it passed overwhelmingly with bipartisan support, which I think is a good sign, but we still have Senator McConnell who doesn't care.
Oh, and don't get me wrong, if I could just interject right quick, and I don't want to take over the Zoom, but don't get me wrong, the fact that there was actually a bill regarding cannabis
I don't
passed is a wonderful thing, right? That it passed the House, which hasn't happened ever, right? And there's actually a push in the previously prohibition industry for advocacy, right? For actual criminal justice reform, for actual economic empowerment. Even if it's on the surface and we're starting to see legislation at state levels follow suit. And so that's a positive thing, because I don't think that's ever happened in our lifetime. And so I
just think it's important for people to know there is a bill, and they can go call their senators and tell them to support it. But I think folks will post about it. But no, I just wanted you to know, because I agree. But I want to be honest, when I got there, I had no idea until I was in committee that you all couldn't bank. I really didn't know. I just assumed it's now legal business. Of course they can bank. But I think a lot of our neighbors don't even realize that.
I didn't.
That's why you all are susceptible so much to, you know, people running cars and taking the cash.
So let's pivot the conversation to where the resources are. Right now, where are the resources for returning citizens, for people that are on the fringes? I've heard that Force Detroit is getting into some human trafficking work. I've heard that that there are people who used to work at strip clubs that are hosting VIP parties. You know, that there were communities that before the funds were dispersed, their crime rates and violence rates went up astronomically. There was even somebody stealing compost from Mama Myrtle at Feed 'em Freedom Farms. Yeah. And so, you know, the question is, if we get to the point where there is not a public opportunity, where's the hope, where are the resources, and how will we pivot? So right now, I guess this is a two-part question. Right now, where the resources currently in the nonprofit sector, and then later on we'll ask Eric and Rashida about the public sector. And then later on, what do you think is the hope locally for community generated solutions?
I think from the resource standpoint, a lot of the resources, I know a couple organizations personally that had to lay off a lot of their staff, because when we think in terms of the endowments, you know, and their investments, with the economy being on hold, it was hard for a lot of folks to get resources. And I remember it was, and I got the link in my phone, I can send it to you, but I remember when the pandemic first hit, and with all the officers, I remember some of the young people in my neighborhood, like, oh shit, it's about to be the purge, right? Because right, when you think about it and you put it into proper context, to see on TV that 600 officers are being quarantined, folks don't see 2,000 officers. They see, oh man, ain't no damn police out here, right? And so it became those type of opportunities, and folks like, they're gonna get it how they live. And in that article, the chief talked about uptick in violent crime, shootings, and I believe it was homicides, right? Don't quote me until I read the link. I sent it to you though, sis. But in that small period of time, right? And so when they was talking about law enforcement coming back, they had to put an intentional scope on violent crime, right? And so people just seeing opportunities and then, I mean, like, the fact of the matter, I mean, again, like Eric said, we got the best of the best, right? In the community, you got folks that don't want the coronavirus, right? Or they call it corona. Then you got others like, damn, we can legally ride around with like, I'm still kind of shell-shocked about seeing folks at nighttime 4-5 deep with masks on, right? And so it's like, damn, you know what? But this is, so people see that as opportunity. No face, no case, right? So again, it's people had to get it how they live, you know?
Yeah. Clarinda, do you know of opportunities for organizations as well as people that you could possibly drop links for and we can share with our audience?
Yeah, the most prominent thing that I am aware of is through 211, and the fact that at the very beginning of this pandemic, there wasn't a mass of resources from a lot of corporate philanthropy to help people with rent payments, utility payments, and things of that nature. Of course, the city had a moratorium on water shutoffs and reinstating that. I know that that's up for question in terms of how long that will last right now. But that is those are two that I know of right away. But I will make sure to send some links so that it can be shared with the community.
Thank you. And Chris, as far as small businesses and the cannabis industry, what resources are available for people who don't have the masses of, employees, the larger companies that are small companies?
And aside from just the cannabis industry, because I sit on the Downtown Business Association as well, like, one of the things I will say, I give credit to Oakland County, because Oakland County immediately, over a month and a half ago, made $11 million, $12 million available for small businesses within Oakland County. Shortly after that, they did a PPP grant for companies who were creating items, right, to support COVID relief. And coming up in the near future, they are putting another $10 million aside for nonprofits. So if you're a nonprofit organization in Oakland County, there's $10 million coming down the pipeline. There's whispers of a specific minority-owned business fund for $7 to $10 million that Oakland County, I think, is going to be putting up for folks to apply for. And these are all grants, not loans.
Do you have links that you can drop for us too that we can share?
So what I'll do is I'll keep you updated with the ones that are coming up for minority-owned businesses and nonprofits. And then there's also a fund that you can apply for right now. I'll drop a link for if you're in Oakland County specifically, where you can get mortgages and rent helped with, all through Oakland County funding. So I'll keep you posted on the other ones, but I can drop some links for the ones that exist right now.
Okay.
I'll also drop some links from the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation and Tech Town for businesses in Detroit and Wayne County.
Yeah.
I don't want it to go ignored, because we work with so many grassroots partners, how many like gritty local initiatives there are. There are, Vice Lords, there's Brother Almighty in the North End neighborhood giving out food. There's New Era supporting seniors, disabled people. There's Brother Fuqua Bay. The Church of the Messiah, FII, has supported grassroots activists across the city to give out direct cash stipends. And on a larger scale, there's Tech Town supporting small businesses and United Way. Also, I mean, just a bunch of plethora of people, the People's Action, so many groups showing up, Force Detroit with PPE gear, so many organizations just trying to make sure that our families are good during this time.
Yeah. And then Eric, what kind of support can we find with the city of Detroit?
So the first thing is if you go to the city and you go to detroitmi.gov/coronavirus, that is where all of our coronavirus stuff, or it also /COVID-19. We were really covering the bases. But all of our stuff is there, right? So our business resources are there, where food is, where you can pick up groceries, how you can get transportation to testing, our testing information. Also, we have it's like a $2, like they'll come get you from your house and take you in a sterilized vehicle and then take you back home for the price of a bus ticket, all right, which I think is $2 last time I was on the bus, which was like 3 weeks ago. Oh, not 3 weeks ago because it's been free since, but before the shutdown. And so we've got really a ton of resources. Also, there's a lot of data on what's going on where the coronavirus is. So what are the cases? What's happening day by day? How many people have the coronavirus? How many people have passed? And then the list of all of our resources are there. So I think that's the best way to go check it out because there is an absolute ton. As far as business resources, CREO has done an incredible job of pulling resources together, kind of in conjunction. They've created this collaboration with DEGC and Tech Town, everybody, called Detroit Means Business. So DetroitMeansBusiness.org has almost all of the stuff you need to know if you're a small business. Playbooks, how do you make sure your place is safe? What are we doing with partitioning? Where are grants? Where are funds? Where are services? Where is mentorship? Where is support? It's all on DetroitMeansBusiness.org. And so what we did as a city was kind of just try to centralize as much stuff as possible and partner with as many people as possible, right? So you even have kind of like the Digital Detroit Initiative with Quicken and Rebrand Cities. And right now they're helping, I think it's it might be over 20 businesses set their websites up and get digitally ready so they can do delivery and so they can take orders online and that sort of thing. But those two websites will take you to all of the stuff from the city. So there's DetroitMI.gov/COVID-19 and DetroitMeanBusiness.org are probably the two best places, I think.
Will you drop them in the chat so we can share them widely with the audience?
Can do.
Thank you so much. And then Congresswoman Tlaib, what kind of national support is there and what's in the Stimulus 2 bill that we should know about and what was, support wise, what is it making up for? Can you let us know?
Yeah, what wins did the people get?
So what we passed in the HEROES Act, which is sitting in the Senate, is another $1,200, which is not a lot, but we did expand more money for kids. So if you have kids, you can get more of a child credit. And I think it's even up to $6,000. The other thing is too, we expanded it to include, so you know how a lot of college kids were left out? So we expanded it to include college kids could get that as well. There is, and I can't remember the dollar amount, but I want to say 30 billion. So Chairwoman Maxine Waters, here it is. And we all worked and we got 200 billion for housing and homelessness programs. This is huge. So 200 billion is in there for homeless, and this is really grassroots. The way we drafted it is we worked with a lot of the national advocates for homeless prevention, but also, some people, the way we define homelessness is not, we also defined it in a way as, I don't even like calling it under housing, but like transient housing, like not permanent housing. So trying to help folks there. There's $1.5 billion Water as a Human Right Fund that I personally got, worked really hard to get in there, would be tremendous for our city. There's so much more in there. And then the one thing that you'll see in there is this big push to get local communities that are smaller. So, you know, Detroit always can get like larger grants, but like things like City of Ecor, City of Rouge, City of Inkster, a lot of, you know, predominantly African-American communities were not qualified to get a lot of direct grants. So there was change in there and allowed. So the total amount is $2 trillion in the HEROES Act. Unfortunately, still sitting in the Senate. The good news is Republican governors, Republican mayors, all these folks are complaining now to their folks in the Senate that share their ideals and said, what are y'all doing? What are you holding this up for? Move it. So that's coming through. I did want, you know, as listeners are checking in, please know this, you know, City of Detroit does not have its own human services department anymore. You know, people forget this. We do not have a Department of Human Services. We all may have grown up with a Department of Human Services, but we do not have one anymore. Wayne Metro Community Action Agency I was just about to put in there. They have a contract to do our human services. So if you need rental assistant, you need a plumber to come out because you need to get the water connected, but you don't have no money for the plumber. You know, it's not end all, but they have a contract with Wayne County. They just got a contract with Wayne County recently, not only just Detroit, for like $3.5 million to provide assistance to Wayne County residents. So I'm about to put this on here. I know they already got like thousands of requests, I think, but they can handle, they have the capacity, I guess, to doing that. But I'm going to add this on here for you all. But remember now, you know, these are the people that pretty much took over the human health services for the city of Detroit. And so people should be reaching out to them about water shut off, housing, food assistance, utility assistance. So this is where you reach out to them directly. And I just want, you know, if you're a resident in my district and you're having difficulty getting in there, please don't hesitate to call my office. I'm about to put my email, let me know. And then also, you know, you may not be part of a church community. Maybe you don't have a church home. A lot of my church community folks are really stepping up. I have one church that feeds like 500 families every Wednesday, another that's passing out masks. So there's a lot of stuff. If you are on Facebook, which if you're listening, you probably are, there's a Metro Detroit COVID page where I put all of these things on. So pay attention to that. There's not sometimes a lot of notice, but you know, fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, where you can get mask sanitizer, things of that nature. But yeah, look out for that.
Thank you for sharing. We're going to pivot the conversation to the next section is what solutions should exist. Ray, I was on a call with you like 2 weeks ago, and I think the statistic you dropped in our chat was that in the red zone at the beginning of COVID, violent crime has spiked by 333%, which I don't have any documentation for, right? That was just our conversation. I guess the question is, when you think about fragile populations and populations that we should have already been supporting, and you talk about like returning citizens, Clarinda phrased it beautifully around how they get the runaround regarding services and support. How should we be showing up in this moment for our most fragile communities?
I think it's time for us, and so even going to the Congresswoman's point, when she was talking about Wayne Metro, we as a community have to be accountable to us, for us, to make sure those resources are being utilized to impact people and transform lives, right? And so being able to have a local body like Force Detroit, right? We've talked about this, to make sure that it lands in these households, right? When you have, and I can't help but to call it out, right? But anytime you have white men or women leading a human service department that's directly impacting Black and brown folks, traditionally, what we've seen is people get screened out versus screened in, right? I come to you and I'm homeless, right? So think about this. I come to you and I'm homeless. You're not housing me. You want to do an intake and assessment and make sure that I have X, Y, and Z in order to house me. Versus me saying, okay, let's address your immediate need, which is housing, and then help you get the proper documents and everything else that you need. So being able to treat people decent. And I think the only folks who can empathize with us is us, right? I know if I had somebody that was homeless and I had some resources for housing, and you're telling me that this single mom of 3 kids is homeless, I'm not trying to screen you out. My job is to house you and then figure out how to make sure that that housing is stable. And so that's what I would throw out as a solution, right? Having that governing board of neighborhoods. So when we think about community-based organizations, right, we also need to have a neighborhood-based organization that's working with the community-based organization to funnel the resources into the neighborhood households to get the impact that's needed.
Yeah, yeah. Clarinda, you convened in your previous role at the United Way, you convened the returning citizens learning community that suggested a set of recommendations. What were the recommendations and how do you feel like COVID has intensified the need for these?
I think, so the recommendations were to coordinate resources, to engage people in job training immediately and pay them daily, so that they, instead of paying them at the end of the week, or paying them bi-weekly because their cash needs are daily. And ensuring that above all, that their basic needs are met right away. Because if the faster you can stabilize a person, the more those coordinated services, the more successful the workforce development and the paying daily, all of that is more successful if you stabilize the person's basic needs. So housing, food, basic utilities, clothing, and then you can start to work through some of the other issues and challenges that they're facing. So those were the recommendations by and large. I think on the subject though of housing for all people who are precariously housed, I think there's sort of levels to this. There's, you start with the like immediate stabilization. You then move the person to fair and quality housing access that allows for them to be in a clean place that's safe, that allows for them to continue on their trajectory. You layer on opportunities though for them to ultimately purchase a home if they need it. And I've seen work done in other communities that have helped people who were formerly precariously housed move into stable housing and then move into home ownership, which is, if we think about Detroit, which used to have some of the highest numbers of African American ownership, and now we are at the very bottom. So our wealth has been stripped away from us. And once that happens, everything else becomes shaky. And so making certain that we're thinking about this from a systemic level and as a continuum, as opposed to just addressing the basic needs and stopping there, I think is where we need to go with how we look at the future of community stabilization.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
And so, Chris, for the communities that you represent, what would be helpful in this time if we could ask for anything? What would put us forward?
That's a good question. And I go back and forth because I know there's a need for resources, to their point, the folks who just spoke, for stabilization. But Ryan also mentioned, in so many words, self-determination, right? And what we're doing for ourselves within the communities. that we exist in. I mean, you have, of course, you have an influx of hotels who don't have business right now, right? And so if there was something arranged or something that made sense for everybody where they could provide housing to individuals that are currently in need to get to a point of stabilization so that you can move through that process that Clarinda referred to. There are some opportunities there in all of the communities, right, that we participate in business in. I would say supporting local businesses, I think, is the next thing, right? It is whatever money you do have necessities, you do have needs. If you can support organizations and businesses that are local to you, then just make sure that you're doing it. Because theoretically, well, that's not the case maybe throughout Pontiac, but theoretically, the folks, especially people of color who own businesses within the community, typically live within that community. And so those types of things, and then I would just say, especially for small business owners and people of color, I would say that the important thing from my perspective is more important moving forward is if you provide an experience, obviously for people who come to your store, but more importantly, what are you doing to have a social footprint, right? Because I think that COVID has really sped up what was going to become the shopping experience 10 to 20 years from now anyway. And so if you are a business fortunate enough to get resources, of course, put a Band-Aid on what's happening right now, but start preparing for what the future of that business is going to look like. And what are you doing digitally to make sure that you're still around in the next 10 years or prepared for the next potential pandemic?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. So before Rashida has to go, Congresswoman Rashida, I want to thank you for joining us. We want to go in for the kill. So let me set this stage up. 40% of Detroiters and 57% of young people under the age of 18 live below the federal poverty line. 22% of Detroiters never completed their high school or degree or received a GED. 33% of the city has attained only a high school or GED credential, but 67% of the jobs in the city require, quote, some college. So this translates to 55% of Detroit that doesn't meet the basic requirements for 67% of the jobs out here. But we're living, we're hustling, we're moving on, we're figuring out our way. So if you could, under that set of understandings about what this community looks like, tell us about what universal basic income is and what the potential is for that in Detroit.
That question is for me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so if you look up the BOOST Act, it actually is the closest. By the way, I support some sort of form of UBI and reparations, which are different. Is universal basic income would be literally what I call funding directly for people, the people's bailout. But this would literally provide resources and funding directly to individuals all across the nation. And it would be consistent. People buffed at Social Security. They buffed at the idea around Medicare, and we're getting closer and closer, hopefully, to universal health care. A lot of these things, we're all too young to even know our history about, like, at one point, even in our school system, kids that only had books are the ones who had money because they actually had to pay for their textbooks. Mm-hmm. There's all these things that people don't realize were not for free and are free now, or resources that, as a society, we like, this is important. And so the truth is, a significant portion of us, the 99% of us, are not as equal to the 1% that has the majority of wealth in our country. And this is about, like, shifting the conversation and saying, how can we provide for people and having a people's bailout? The BOOST Act is the closest, according to economists, and so the closest we have to some sort of universal basic income. When it comes to city of Detroit, of course, when you look at movements like $15 minimum wage, which should probably be at 20, and yes, they've already done an article like Rashida thinks it should be, well, because it took us 7 years to even get to 15. And now that we're at, people are past talking about 15. But the movement of getting to 15 and getting movement, at least out of the House, we passed it, it's sitting in the Senate, was that local municipalities, they're the ones who started passing, we got to do $15 minimum wage in the community, in this city, or they were the ones starting to push the agenda, not waiting for a national movement, to fit in the halls or to reach the halls of Congress. But 70% of folks that work in the city of Detroit do not live in the city of Detroit. And it's so mind-boggling when I hear a lot of our elected folks in the city level saying, look at all these outsiders coming in here protesting for Black Lives Matter. I'm like, and that's great. That's great. But they're not complaining about the fact that 13% of only of our police force is residents, or that 70% of the people that do come in the city of Detroit to work are not residents. That should be something of more of a debate versus, who's coming out yelling out Black Lives Matter. So it's really important to know those numbers, and 60% of our residents in the city of Detroit actually work outside of the city of Detroit. And so there is this, imbalance, but universal basic income would help really, the tools and the weapon to combat the war on poverty. If we really wanted to do it, this is how we do it. And this is aggressive, yes, and all of it, but that's what it needs right now. Because if you look at the last few years, y'all, just look at the kids count data, poverty among children alone in the city of Detroit, I know some are from Pontiac and other places, but poverty alone in the city of Detroit among children has actually increased. And so, we need to figure that out. And I got to tell you, Leah, I have a letter, 111 colleagues signed it, for $305 billion towards education in the next COVID relief package, because our school districts, maybe not Detroit yet, but some school districts are talking about coming back with only 2 days out of the week to do schooling. Did you all know that? They're talking about that across the country because the revenue is so low now and the resources are so low, they won't have the money to get back up and running in the fall full force. So that impacts childcare, that impacts so much. And you see these numbers that you just talked about. Imagine now with the lack of resources. And again, the per pupil for one child in Detroit public schools, I think, is the same or even lower than it was in the 80s. And there's a study that shows that it should be at 10,000 per child in our school system. So we're not investing in people enough. We're not. And universal basic income would be really transformative for so many of our residents, much of which, this would just be supplemental. It's not even going as far enough, but it is something that a lot of people are talking about now. And just like, people bash the Social Security system and everything, you should see now, I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat, they're like, you better protect my Social Security now. More and more people are saying we need universal health care. And you're going to hear more and more people talking about, yeah, we need universal basic income. And trust me, they do these bailouts for corporations. Every time I turn around, there's yet another bill that pretty much does, zero interest grants versus loans, all these kinds of things that they're doing now for some of our industry. Even here in Michigan, some of them don't even pay any taxes. That's why General Motors, we're asking how much taxes did y'all pay, and they still won't release it. Somebody filed a case to just even getting that information. So, but it's our money. We should be able to decide what to do with it. And we want it to be reinvested in ourselves versus some of these broken systems that keep folks uneducated, no access to thrive, and all those kinds of things. So sorry, I know that's a long answer.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that. I want to hear from other folks. How do people think universal basic income could transform Detroit? How does your community look different if all of a sudden people have routine access to resources? So
can I jump in just on two of these points? Because there are two really interesting points to me. There's part one is the educational attainment, right? When you look at people in the context of their certificates and degrees, I think you lose sight on what people are able to do. And so it always frustrates me when people are like, oh, 33% of Detroiters don't have college degrees. I am one of those 33% of Detroiters. People often forget that because I don't present as what you think of when somebody doesn't have a college degree, right? I dropped out of community college. I always call it a small drop, right? It wasn't even like I didn't drop out of Harvard. I dropped out of Henry Ford Community College. Yet here I am able to not only be the chief storyteller for a city, but run a business, hire people. I've hired people with master's degrees. The real situation is the talent pipeline is broken. Mm-hmm. We want to hire people and we don't want to do the work to vet them. So we vet them with the degree. If we actually took the time to give people a test or some type of other type of rubric, we would find out that they could do the jobs we want to. I've almost not met a single person who has a job in the thing they went to college for. So the college didn't prepare them for the job that they have. And so we need to really fully fundamentally rethink our talent pipeline system. Like that's the part one. It drives me insane. Part two, talking to UBI, because I love the whole idea around UBI. People who don't want free college, who hate UBI, and who are trying to make sure, their argument is always, well, I didn't get that, so you shouldn't get that. It's a brutally selfish argument that has nothing to do with the context of our society. Because I never heard anyone go, oh, I don't have a $250,000 missile. Why does the military get one? Right? That argument doesn't make sense. The reality is that if you have more money at the bottom of the economy, it will stimulate the rest of the economy because more people will be able to consume. As long as people don't have the funds to consume, it chokes the small businesses at the bottom. One of the biggest challenges in Detroit is that people in Detroit's income is so low, they don't have the income to repeat patronize businesses. Without repeat patronization, businesses cannot survive. You don't get walking traffic. You don't get mom and pop shops. You don't get that kind of thoroughfare because people can only visit you once a year. And if they can only visit you once a year, you will not survive. And so UBI kind of floods the bottom. Because let me tell you, Bill Gates is not going to come to Good Cakes and Bakes, no matter how much he likes it, 400 times a year. It doesn't matter. Trickle down. Oh God, I love that. That term drives me crazy, right? Because businesses, and I forgive this rant, but I was a business owner, and I think we need to have a conversation about taxes and businesses. Having more money does not encourage a business to hire more people.
That's not.
Demand does. Filling demand causes businesses to hire more people. If I get more tax breaks, that means I get to give me more money, which is lit. And I appreciate it. And I get to go buy more stuff for myself. But that doesn't mean I'm going to hire 48 people. But if suddenly 1,000 people showed up on my doorstep with the ability to purchase my goods, now I need to hire more people. UBI is good for business because it makes the money flow into the businesses, causing me to have to hire more people, causing me to hire more people. No one's asking for UBI to be $50,000 a month. Andrew Yang was asking for $1,000 a month. $1,000 a month is not even a lot of money. Food stamps, like oh, people are living on food stamps. Have you ever lived on food stamps? I have. It's not a win, right? Like you're not out here just balling out, buying steak and drugs with it, right? Like it's ridiculous. There's bullshit arguments that are being made by people who were raised on food stamps. There are people who are Republicans who grew up on SNAP benefits and welfare, who now are getting these weird kickbacks, who have forgotten that this stuff is the bare minimum of survival.
Yeah.
But when you give people the capacity to purchase and earn, and give them the ability to explore other opportunities, they go, wow, if I can go here, I can live better. You want to achieve over that bare minimum. UBI creates a grounding, as does rethinking our talent systems, so that you can bring people into a place and you can learn from people who are maybe not college educated, but damn sure resourceful. And if you've ever run a business or ever had, or looked at somebody who just said, hey, my computer's not working, I guess I can't work today. That's somebody who's not resourceful. You want somebody who's gonna say, oh, my computer's not working, let me go find a way around this problem to benefit the greater whole. Those are Detroiters. Those are the type of people you want to hire. And I'm gonna step right back down off my soapbox, but it does. I hear those stats. They say, "Oh, Detroit doesn't have the talent." It's like that's not necessarily true. What business don't have is the will to try, and that's two totally different things. You just pawned off your laziness onto a populace, and I don't think that's fair and justified.
It's absolutely.
I want to just kind of add some context to the UBI discussion specifically. So first, I want to say I do support UBI, and I'm not adverse in the boost bill that Congresswoman Tlaib talked about. But I have done some research on UBI, and very similar to Social Security benefits and SSI, it is the bare minimum. And as you provide an influx of cash into the economy, it does have a way, because the economy is dynamic, the pricing, the cost of things start to shift as a result of it. Not right away, but what happens is it diminishes the impact of that. Why am I bringing that up? Because UBI is not a silver bullet, right? And I don't think anyone is saying it is, but I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that UBI is one way to begin balancing out wealth disparity in this nation, but it's not the only way. And we must continue to think about how are we making sure that people earn wages that are fair and equitable. How do we continue to make certain that people have access to the education and training that they need? How do we make certain that people aren't dependent on things like UBI because they can't do anything else? They can't get it. They can't get what they need. So I think that having something to stimulate the economy like a UBI is important, but I don't think that's where we stop. I think that it is one such tool to help with an economic boost. But if we only did that, we would find in about a decade that UBI is much like senior citizens living on fixed income. They still can't afford shit.
Yeah. We still got to push for reparations, right? That's right. Go ahead, Ray.
No, I was just saying that was big. One of the things, though, we was having a conversation today, and we was just talking about, America, and how we were enslaved, right, 401 years ago, but we're the only people that's still in the country that we was brought to, and so it's like, what the fuck do you expect? I mean, like, what do you really expect, right? We was enslaved in this country, and it's like we're still here, right? And so when I heard Congresswoman talk about, our kids is fighting for a right to literacy, right? Those Osborne students, they pushed, right? So if we think about that, and then we put it into context, think about financial literacy, right? Because no matter how much money a person makes, or how much money you give a person, if you are not educated around finances, you're guaranteed to lose. And Clarinda, you may have read this, right? Black Folk Guide to Making Big Money in America. One of my finance coaches encouraged me to get that book, and it came used. And so in that space, it was a privilege for me to have a financial coach, right? Coming out the projects. So like, shit, I'm finally making it, right? I'm getting people to talk to me about money. But that book cost a damn near $300 used. I have the ability to read, and I had the ability and the privilege to afford that, right? To trigger different thinking. A lot of my people in the community, in the neighborhoods, they don't have that privilege. So they rely on me to share information, share things with them, right? And so again, we're talking about this thing of empathy for us, right? We're the only ones that's gonna empathize with each other, right? And so we have to, again, start building that home ownership, letting that be the forefront of our conversation. Eric, going back to your point, I got some guys in the hood who, and some of the elected officials that met these guys, and they can't read no blueprint or none of that. But they can go to Home Depot, work a tape measure, And I'm talking about build you a house from the ground up, right? And so when you go back to that trickle down shit, right? I tell people all the time, if we hire contractors, and everybody on here know this, right? If you hire a contractor to build your house from the and all you got to flat in, you say, listen, I want you to build me a house. If the first thing they try to put on that house is the roof, you know damn well they don't know what the hell they doing. The roof, you cannot put a roof on a house first. And so that's that trickle. So everything that we're doing has to come from the bottom, right? That's what growth, that's how things grow, you know? And so I think really being intentional about home ownership and financial, you know, that financial education is what we gotta have. That's our free.
If I can just depend and talk a little bit about reparations. So while we're in this like window of white awakening, this is the right time to start talking about what, because it's a window, right? It's gonna close. Let's just be real about that. So while we're in this period, this is the time to talk about what does reparations really need to look like. And UBI, to Congresswoman Tlaib's point, and reparations are two different things. And reparations to me doesn't sound asinine or absurd because we have documented evidence. There's a book called The Half Has Never Been Told by Edward Baptiste that documents the fact that there is wealth that has been built up over generations in this nation in every corner, that is rooted in enslaved humans and free labor. So we have the business case if anybody needs that, right? But I don't think anybody here needs it. To me, what reparations need to look like is not cash in hand. It's free education at all levels. It's making certain that we have the means to pay down payments on homes, not just in communities that are declining. I'm not talking about an FHA loan because the seller still has the ability to decline FHA loans, which is a legal form of discrimination in appreciating neighborhoods. But I'm talking about being able to capitalize on the wealth and the generation of wealth that this nation has deprived us from to this day. So making sure that as we're thinking about this conversation, we know that just giving me a check is not gonna do. We need to have the opportunity to build our wealth. And I think that's what reparations need to come in the form of erasing student loan debt retroactively for Black people, right? These are institutions that, barring HBCUs, we were not allowed to be a part of. And then once we finally get there, because we don't have equity in homes because our families couldn't buy due to redlining, we have to take it out all in loans. I'm a case of that. Stacey Abrams' book talks a lot about that. So to me, we have to be thinking really intentionally about reparations, and we have a window of opportunity to do that. And I think it's important that we bring those up in conversations about economics.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So eloquently put, right? I still want to check. If anybody is listening, cut me a check. For real. I got some children. They keep growing out of clothes. Cut me a check.
I do think, I think Clarinda makes such an incredible point. Right now, I like to tell people that racism now is geographic, right? Because they've removed the words, but they've pushed all the same type of people into geographic areas. So you don't say, oh, we want to harm Black people, let's take school out of Black people, take school away from Black people. You say, oh, in Detroit area, we're going to defund, people in there. And anybody who's in that space, they get impacted negatively. But due to redlining, due to, districting and all this other kind of stuff, you get Hispanic people over here, Black people over here, Arabic people over here, white people over here. And so in the same way, we just have to get better at the way we frame and we message, because that's why we keep losing these battles, right? If we want stuff positive to happen for Black people, you focus it directly on those same geographic areas. And you say, look, we need reparations. What we need is education we need more funds for education in this geographic area, in this zip code, in those zip codes, because that's how they're defunding things. That's how we need to refund things. I worry that we're not gonna be able to say, hey, give all Black people a check, because it's been a long time and a lot of us are kind of deluded. So there's gonna be some You know, lady who's 2% black because she did like a DNA test that was like, look, I'm gonna need 10 bands too. It's like, I don't know, Margaret, I don't think you fit. And then it's gonna get wiggly. It's gonna get annoying as hell, right? And you're gonna have to fight for the rest of the time. We ain't not gonna get nothing. That's what happened with affirmative action. It was to help, to help people that needed some assistance, and white women were like, dope, need some assistance, affirmative action. So what we're gonna have to really look at is the geographic areas of depression, and then start to, what would it look like? What would those communities have if there was not that type of resource pulled out of it? Would there be equity in the homes and the businesses in that area? Would there be a way to rent to own in a way that's unique to that area, so that you would then have a value and equity in the actual ground and not just be the highest city of renters? Would you then have, would you be able to raise the teacher's salary to then attract better teachers, to then create, this whole conversation about defunding the police, so that you now have people who show up, you can call social workers to deal with challenges instead of people with guns. And so as we start to have those conversations around where that money goes, that to me is what reparations begins to look like, which is different than the getting the check. And the only reason why I'm afraid of that is because I know how the opposition frames. When you say Black Lives Matter, they say all lives matter. When you say reparations, they say, oh, but we all need money too, because we are all, what do they say? The Irish were enslaved too. It's like, bro, that's not even halfway the same thing.
For sure.
But it's how we position it. And so we have to get a lot more savvy about how we position the things that we want and need, or they'll get tied up in Congress. And then we'll end up with painted roads, and we won't end up with police reform.
For sure. I'm just saying, if somebody is listening, I think you two are right. Clarinda, I think you're brilliant. And if somebody is listening, slide me a check for the gym shoes. Chris,
no doubt. No, can I just say, in all of those points, you're right, were beautifully put. And the beauty, so there is no me participating in the cannabis industry without a real sense of criminal justice reform and potential for economic empowerment. It was one of the reasons why I was attracted to it, because it was an industry that was in its infant stages from a legal standpoint, right? And other industries that we're discussing have had hundreds of years of legislation that's been built on top of legislation to create systematic oppression, right? And so what I would encourage us to do, hopefully, is to utilize the cannabis industry as a guinea pig in some ways and take fragments from it, because every piece of legislation that every membership organization that actually has some teeth, has something to say about, has a sense of social equity embedded in it. Mm-hmm. And that can't be said necessarily. I'm not saying all of the organizations, but the NCIA, that's the oldest and the largest, and other organizations have made it a point to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so every piece of legislation should reflect social equity to some extent. And that's not the case in other industries. And so again, I'll go back to the point, if you are hearing a lot of rhetoric around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and actual criminal justice reform, these are things that we'd love to be talking about in other industries that just hasn't transpired. And the cannabis industry is young enough that we can utilize it and then try to replicate it and make it make sense for other industries as we move forward for the fight for equity, inclusion, and reparations at the same time. So,
yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So we are wrapping up this conversation. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining. This time is such a meaningful conversation, because while we're talking about what we need, we also need to make sure that we are strategically aiming it towards economic justice. And so that's why we went ahead and had this town hall, even with the things that are going on, because money is freedom. Access to wealth is freedom. And I'm gonna put Eric on the spot. We got a storyteller. I want him to talk about the narrative and how we can change it, if he doesn't mind, if he would be so audacious. No, thank you.
what is the story of the last few months, right? We've had COVID, disproportionate Black and brown death, Latino people didn't get tested at the same rate. There's been a whole confrontation with the police. You are a storyteller, brother. Bring it home.
Do it.
The story of the last few months is WTF. No, the story to me is that systems are real. But if systems are real, that means they can be dismantled, right? You can't solve the problem without acknowledging that there is a problem. And you cannot solve an illness by focusing on the symptoms, right? And so police brutality, housing inequality, economic injustice, all that kind of stuff are symptoms of systemic and institutional racism and disenfranchisement. And so what we have to do is focus on the core problem. The way we view Black people and brown people, right? Anti-Blackness is a global phenomenon. And so what's happening is that all of that comes to bear. The inequity in the medical and the health system comes to bear when there's a global pandemic. But to me, what that means is that we have this unique opportunity at this time to truly make changes while people are seeing it. Because there's another thing that we know. People have the memory of goldfish. And if we don't really make some changes in the next 6 months, people are going to go back to forgetting that all of this happened. I keep joking that I wonder if all the companies who are making Juneteenth a paid holiday realize that it happens every year, right? Like, we didn't make up Juneteenth this year, and then you're going to let all your people go off work this year, and we're going to forget about it next year. Like, we still celebrate Juneteenth next year, right? And so we have to continue to beat that drum. We have to continue to march, to continue to protest, to continue to yell, and continue to raise the banner. The other thing that I would like to put into this story of our history books is that anger gets shit done. Protesting, yelling, and then sometimes fighting gets things done. If we would have asked kindly for George Floyd's murderers to be detained, they would be like Breonna Taylor's murderers, right? Like, still free as hell, right? And so sometimes you have to shake the table. There is no time in American history where people came around to the people they were oppressing without a lot of table shaking. People who are oppressed have to make noise. And so the things that we need to take out of this time is that making noise works, that systems are real, that we need to focus on the illness and we need to dismantle it at its core so that we can have real tangible change. And lastly, we cannot let go of that fight. They will rename every city street, plaza, and Aunt Jemima bottle before they defund the police, and hopefully don't notice it. Every single thing gonna be called Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Aretha Franklin Boulevard. We're gonna have all of that shit, and we're not gonna have no police reform. And so we cannot take our eye off the prize just because they throw us a couple bones. We have to remind people that we've seen this before.
Yeah.
We may not be as tough as our ancestors, as our grandparents who dealt with incredible injustice. But what we do have is the fortune of hindsight. We get to remember what had happened was. And we get to see that and share that digitally and globally in a way that we can continue to apply pressure. And so that, to me, is what the story of this time is. The very beginning of an incredible change, if we so deem it. And if we don't, it is the very end of a ball fumbled.
Right.
And so that is, that's where I am with that.
Our next town hall, I want to thank everybody who joined us on Facebook, as well as our panelists. We're so honored to have you, whether it was last night when we spoke to the police chief and several of you guys joined us, and this night as well as we addressed solutions to problems. We just want to thank everybody. You can keep up with our next town hall, which is going to be on the school to prison pipeline. You can check us out on Force_Detroit on Instagram, as well as Force Detroit on Facebook.
we have a rally tomorrow. There's a rally tomorrow. A civil rights attorney, his name is Mike, forgot his last name, has uncovered suppression files around juror disenfranchisement in Wayne County. And so although in Wayne County, Black people make up 40% of the population, we've been strategically screened out of juror applicants so that civic and criminal cases, so that defendants don't get juries of their peers. So we're going to be posting about that. Check out Force Detroit or Live Free Detroit Facebook page to get it. It is Friday. I'm sorry, is today not Friday? Is tomorrow not Friday?
Wow.
No, I'm sorry.
Another day.
I'm sorry. It's Friday. My team is telling me it's Friday. It is Friday.
Don't feel bad, sis. I looked and it was June. I don't know what the heck happened. Like,
either.
I'm like, damn, days stopped mattering after the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
We at the crib.
Absolutely.
Alia and Najanava, I just want to thank you for putting together not one, but two dynamic days of conversations that matter to our community and doing so authentically. You two ladies are amazing. I am so honored to be among Eric and Calvin and Rashida and my homeboy Ray. So it's just like, I mean, I'm just so honored, and I thank you two ladies for the work that you do.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you guys for thinking I was more important than I actually was and inviting me with important people.
We appreciate you for joining us. And thank you, Chris. We look forward to hearing about and to engaging you in criminal justice reform work that is aligned with your cannabis work. All right. Bless
Appreciate
it.
y'all. Thank y'all. Love y'all. Y'all beautiful. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Peace, everyone.
Bye.